Welcome to the Resolution Room, a space for reflection and meaningful dialogue. I'm Dr. Nishay Lowe. My work sits at the intersection of leadership, communication, and conflict transformation, helping people see challenge as a teacher, not a threat. Each episode invites you to look closer, think deeper, and lead with greater intention. Because resolution isn't the absence of difficulty, it's learning to move through it on purpose. Let's get into it. Sometimes the most toxic culture isn't just in your company. It's within your own body. In this episode of the Resolution Room, I'm joined by Rich Ellis, award-winning personal trainer and health strategist, to explore the deep connection between physical well-being and workplace resilience. Rich shares how stress, conflict, and poor health are often symptoms of the same imbalance, and how transforming your habits can transform your leadership. From the physiology of stress to the emotional intelligence that keeps us grounded, this conversation bridges the worlds of fitness and business, showing how strength training, recovery, and awareness all begin in the same place, within. All right, Rich, can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure thing. My name is Rich Ellis. I am a health coach based here in Auckland, New Zealand, down on the other side of the planet. Some people say down under. I think Aussies use down under more than New Zealanders. And I work with organizations in the wellbeing space. I run wellbeing programs for organizations who get the value of health and understand the investment that a wellbeing program brings to their organization, to their culture, to their bottom line. So I've been doing that for, I guess, as an evolution of being in the health industries for about 17 years, specifically in the corporate space for about 4 or 5 now.
That's amazing. So before you became PT of the Year, what was one moment when you realized physical health and workplace health were more connected than people think?
So my background being a PT, as you said, PT of the Year, physical. So in America, you might say physical therapist, which is still the same abbreviation, whereas on this side of the world, we would use those initials for personal trainer. But very similar kind of work, depending on the additional training that you do. And I think, like going back to your question, I think the levers that you learn to pull in that industry are two very basic ones, right? You've got the exercise lever and you've got the nutrition lever. And again, depending on your scope of practice, you can use a lot of the nutrition or not so much the nutrition. And I realized that those two levers weren't enough. Like, human beings are far more complicated things than these two inputs and all these outputs. It just isn't that simple. Male bodies are different to female bodies. Time, a stage of life is different for different bodies as well. And so the health interventions that different people need at different stages is going to be different. And if you've only got those two levers, then you just don't have enough tools in your toolkit. And for me, that's really where the journey started. It was about, right, what else do I need to know about, menopause? What do I need to know about, teenage years, going from sort of childhood to adulthood, and what does that mean for athletes and non-athletes and all those different people? And so it became a journey of exploration, and that's sort of where the health coach journey kicked in for me. And it was about understanding lifestyle medicine, essentially, and the way in which we live our lives is what's contributing to chronic illness. And so it's reversing some of that stuff is a lot of what I do. Mm-hmm. And so there are some commonalities with people that I come across because we're all living in the same world. We live in a very similar food environment. We live in a high pressure work environment, generally speaking. And so there are things you can work on with everybody that will help. And then there's the individual stuff because everybody's individual circumstances are different. So it's almost like a massive Venn diagram of life, where some things intersect, some things don't intersect. And so you need to approach it from both those directions. Some of it everybody will be able to benefit from, and then you have to have those individual conversations as well so that people can get the more nuanced, customized advice.
Mm. In your experience, how does unresolved workplace conflict manifest physically in people?
That's a really good question. And I've recently done some work around values. I provide a workshop around values, and that's one of the components that workplace conflicts and challenge can be, because it's not the only lens, but it's one really useful lens because it helps you understand the differences between people, right? We all have different values and we all live through our own values, right? They drive our behaviors. And sometimes when individuals are in conflict, it can just be a mismatch of values. It can be as simple as, well, if you understood this person's values and they understood your values, you could then start talking a language that you both understood, realize where you're coming from, and eradicate some of that, or at least reduce some of that conflict. So that's one of the lenses. And I think other components to that in the workplace are the environment in terms of the culture in the organization. I listened to a couple of your other guests, and it was very interesting hearing about one of you. I've forgotten the guy's name, but he's written a book, and he was talking about ways in which people understand themselves. There's that self-awareness piece, that's that other people awareness, emotional intelligence. Everybody's at a different place on that journey as well. So when people need some help in that space, there are some workshops that I do there as well, which help with that self-awareness, understanding themselves better. And again, that overlaps with values. So I think all of those play into that conflict piece. And then, of course, you've got the other pieces, which are, sort of workload, work volume, work hours, which are more imposed from an organizational point of view. And sometimes if people don't have any agency or power to have more influence on the work that they do, sometimes that can also cause conflict in the workplace. So multi reasons for those things. And from my perspective, the health piece, you can work on all of those different lifestyle factors, but if there's something bigger than that going on from an organizational point of view that potentially everybody is suffering as a result, that's the bit that needs to be addressed, regardless of all the individual stuff and the health piece, because none of that's going to necessarily work. It's like the fish in the fish bowl, right? Change the water first, then start doing the other stuff. Because if the water's toxic, it doesn't matter how many lifestyle interventions you give, the water's still toxic.
Yeah. I'm wondering, do you see like some sort of overlap? So I know like in our personal lives, right? Like when you're not taking care of or addressing certain issues, it shows up physically on you, whether your skin's breaking out or you're maybe gaining weight or I don't know, just certain things happen physically when we're not dealing with things internally. Do you find that to be the same in professional life as well, like in the workplace, like when we're not dealing with those internal conflicts you were talking about?
Yeah, I think so. Some people will present stress externally and you'll see it, that, like you say, the skin is a great example because it's just a telltale of what's going on inside. But not everybody does. Some people internalize, and those people potentially are the harder ones to spot and potentially more important because you can't see it coming. And there's some overlap into some mental health issues as well. Potentially that's the danger zone for organizations, because if they're not managing it, and then it's not being, people aren't being looked after. So yeah, there's that going on as well. So it's about having an awareness of the psychosocial safety, and psychological safety, so that it's not just about well-being as well. It's all those other human factors that we need to consider.
And so you've helped clients make measurable changes like lowering blood pressure. How do you link those improvements to the emotional and professional well-being?
I think when people are aware of some of their medical markers improving, I think that makes a big difference to their overall well-being, because they know, it's what gets measured gets managed, right? So when you are measuring some of those markers, and blood pressure is a good one because it's it's the silent killer when it's taken unmanaged, but there's a whole bunch of others, like, you've got your blood markers for glucose, you've got lipids, a whole bunch of stuff, liver, whatever you like. I think in terms of emotional well-being, when those things are in line, you feel physically better in yourself because they're taken care of. You know that your bloods are getting checked. You're getting all the other things that can be measured, checked, and that plays into how you feel day to day. And I guess it's just one of those things. You've ticked that box. You're looking after yourself, and that certainly helps support you emotionally. And you feel like you can give everything a good nudge, give your day a good go, because those things are being taken care of. And some people aren't necessarily aware of how important those are. When you highlight it in the program and people go to their doctor or whatever it may be, and they see these numbers change, they realize the impact these little changes have over the course of the program, and their health changes as a result. It's gratifying for me to see the the satisfaction in those people's changes, because you can see they may have seen numbers that they haven't seen before or their doctor hasn't seen before, and they're reporting them back. And that's the impact that you've had. And it's very satisfying work from my point of view, but it's great to see the smile on their face because they know that number has made a difference to their lives, to their families' lives, and their overall well-being for sure.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I haven't spent much time on your side of the world just yet, but it's on my to-do list. But thinking about the work you do there and sort of the differences in culture in the United States, I'm sure you're aware of the workplace culture in the US. It's a very big emphasis on working hard, working a lot, and almost stress is like just part of the game, right? Like it's almost people feel like it's a badge of honor to be stressed out from work or work extra hours or overtime and all these things, even though we know the stress impacts, especially in comparison to how things maybe work out there. Why do you think so many leaders ignore the physical impact of stress until it's too late?
There's an element of burying the head in the sand, isn't there, I think? This is the way it's always been done, so therefore why should we necessarily do anything differently? And I think it's the priorities of the organization, isn't it? And the values of the organization. I think when the bottom line is the only focus, then it's very easy to get carried away with deliver, whatever the organization's goals are, and not look at it from a holistic point of view. And at the end of the day, the biggest asset in every organization is its people, but they're not necessarily valued as the biggest asset. And I think leaders can get to that position of comfort where the numbers are really good, we're performing really well. Well, actually, there's this person with this, and there's this person with that, and there's some burnout, and there's, this person's been sick more times than, is normal. There are some telltale signs that, again, a good leader should be noticing and taking care of and saying, okay, how do we address this? What can we do to still perform, still deliver the numbers, but do it in a way that means that we don't have to have as much sickness, that we don't have to have whatever the turnover rate is. If people are leaving organizations, again, that's another sign that, something's not right. So I don't think it can be ignored forever. I think it can be ignored for a certain period of time, but there's the other element of when there are organizations out there investing in their people and they've got a nice, healthy workplace culture and they've got that balance right, they become the employer of choice. And those who aren't addressing it are then left behind. And so at some point, those leaders need to realize that it's actually a competitive advantage. It's something that makes people want to work for those organizations. So it can't be ignored forever, but I think head in the sand policy is unsustainable, but I think historically that's where it's come from. So those who are prepared to adapt and change will be the leaders of the future for sure.
Do you find the same sort of head in the sand approach in New Zealand as well?
Yeah, absolutely. There are the leaders of organizations who know, it was always health and safety, right? There was lots of emphasis on safety and none on health. And yet, the safety thing is important. You can't ignore that, right? We know that there are workplace accidents, certainly in certain industries, the building being the obvious one. But there was never much emphasis on the health side of health and safety. And I think it's probably starting to shift the other way now, so that we know everyone's got all the safety systems nailed, but not the health systems nailed. And they're educating themselves on that process. Well, what does that look like for our organization? How can we make this part of the way we do business? And there are some smart companies that are doing that really well, incentivizing people to sleep, rewarding them for sleeping over 7 hours. I've seen stories of organizations in the US doing that. And, it's only a small component, but it's a massive one in terms of the accumulation of benefit that you get when people are well slept for themselves and the organization. So, yeah, there's definitely some head in the sand stuff here. And there's also the sort of the halfway house. There's the businesses which are, let's get a speaker in to talk about sleep. And I've been that speaker, right? I've done the workshop and walked away and you're like, well, what's going to change? You've got you've got a workbook and you've got some stuff to be doing, but there's no follow-up, there's no accountability, there's no, what are you actually going to do? And that's where the coaching piece comes in my program, is that, you deliver the information, but then the coaching behind that's like, okay, you enjoyed that, great, excellent. What are you going to do? What will you commit to today, tomorrow, next week? And I will follow you up to make sure that you have done those things.
Love it.
So those are the organizations that are reaping the benefits, because it's not just about one workshop. It's about, well, actually, this needs to be part of the way we do business. And weave it into the organization.
I actually want to go a little deeper on your approach because I wholeheartedly agree. Like I commend anyone who even does the one workshop. Obviously, you have to start somewhere, but I am also a very huge advocate consistency, consistency, consistency. And that's why I work to be a long-term partner with my clients as well, because it really is about unlearning all these unhealthy habits we've been doing for so long and replacing them with better alternatives. But to do that, again, it takes time. And unfortunately, we don't live in the society where everybody wants to take the time it takes to actually build something sustainable. So talk to me a little more about what role does consistency play in both health transformation and culture change?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. None of those things change quickly. We know that, right? If someone wants to go to the gym and lose some weight or put on some muscle, it's not 2 or 3 gym visits, right? In fact, it's probably 10 or 12 before you even start seeing change. And I think that's exactly the same thing with organizations and their cultures. You have to weave it into the way you do business. And that's why I encourage my clients to commit to 12 months, right? Because you can measure some numbers at the beginning, you can take some surveys, you can run the program, and then you can do those measures again. And there's some good measurability, return on investment, what's changed, what's improved, not just the numbers, but how do people feel? And that's where you can start to see the culture shift along with the health, because people are talking about other things other than work around the water cooler, right? It's like, oh, did you go for that run? And did you have that salad you said you were going to have? And did you drink the water? And did you take the holiday? And all those things which are linked back into these behavior changes with a wellbeing program. And so over time, it becomes the new them. They become different people. Their identity slowly changes, and as does the organizations and the culture that goes with that. So yeah, you're right. It is about consistency, and it's always consistency over intensity, right? We know that, and it will always win out. So it's really important for someone like me to be consistent because people are watching. People are seeing some of the things that I do when I'm with them. And if I'm doing things that are not demonstrating, some of those healthy habits, then that's license for them to go, well, if he didn't do it, then I'm not going to do it. So, it's a consistency both from a delivery point of view, but it's consistency in a behavior point of view. And not just me, right? The leaders of the organization, programs that have worked well were the ones that the leaders bought into, and actually their behaviors were the model for the organization, because when there isn't any buy-in from them, then it doesn't filter through the organization. And I've worked with companies who don't get that or haven't demonstrated it. And it's like pushing it uphill for me, because I'm trying to be the leader of the organization or the leader of the health benefits as well as delivering the program. And it just doesn't work. You have to have that buy-in for everything to work across the whole organization.
You know what? I love when people use the gym metaphor. I think it's just so relatable because we've all been there where it's like, and even the funny thing is like you start to see the results you want, right? Even if you go on the diet or do whatever it is, and not just like trendy diets, but like a real diet. When you do that stuff, you see the results, and it's funny how your brain processes it because it's like you see the results, and so you stop doing the thing that got you the results and just have to start over again because it wears off. And I think really understanding that it's a mindset shift and a lifestyle change, because at the end of the day, you're building habits you're honestly going to have to continue indefinitely to keep seeing the results.
Exactly. The goalpost just gets slightly further away each week or each month. And that's why having a coach in as part of that process is so important, right? Because, in all sporting environments, the coach is the person that makes the difference for the team, right? The team are the team, but it's the coach that sets the tone, the culture. Where are we aiming today? What's are we going to win this championship? All those sorts of things. If you've got a team like Wrexham's a really good example, right? The Welsh team that Ryan Reynolds has taken over with Rob McElhenney, which is on Disney Channel, right? Disney Plus. It was a team that was failing. Obviously, they put a lot of finance into it, but they've won their league every single year, 3 years in a row, and they've moved up. Now, there's a lot of belief in there, but it's the same with individuals. It's the same with organizations. They just did the basics consistently every single season. And those players, and a lot of the players are the same players, have never been that far ahead in the leagues previously. And so, it's a perfect example or metaphor for, that consistency piece. It's, it's turning up on the days that you don't want to turn up. because those are the ones that are the most satisfying. You walk away going, I didn't want to do that, but I did it. And as James Clear says in his book, Atomic Habits, it's a vote for the person that you want to be. And so you translate that into the workplace. It's not just about delivering the numbers, but it's being that holistic person that, is looking after themselves. They're looking after their colleagues as well, because they're leading, even if they're not the leader of the organization. So there's a whole bunch of that stuff. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, consistency is not fun or sexy, but it's necessary.
It's not. But you look at all the greats, you look at like Tom Brady, right? From an American perspective, look at him as a perfect example of a man who has just been outlived all the stats and been at the top of his game all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
And I am sure all of the work that we never see is what makes the difference in the background, right? The recovery stuff, the eating well, the getting the sleep, getting the body back online for the next week's game, and all those sorts of things. That's a perfect metaphor for all areas of life.
Absolutely. So I know for me, like I work a lot with like nonprofits and academic institutions. And so many people are just, their emotional bank is empty, right? So in that kind of environment, I know that happens across organizations in general. So when a team is running on empty mentally and physically, what's the first health habit you suggest that they change?
Good question. I suppose it may be different for everybody, but I'd have to ask why they're running on empty to start with. It could be a takeover, a transition. Some big times of change can often generate that sort of state. And so it's, well, how well managed was that change, if it was change that did it? What was missing in the change process that's meant that everybody's empty? And the first thing that sort of springs to mind to actually answer the question is, well, how's your sleep looking? If everybody's empty, you can't build on no foundations, right? And sleep really is the foundation for all of those levers that I talked about earlier and a lot more. And it's the first place to start with a lot of things. Like I don't do diet interventions with clients until I know their sleep's on track, because sleep affects your hunger hormones and satiety hormones and a whole bunch of other stuff, which you even lose more muscle than you do fat when you're trying to lose weight if you're underslept. So there's no point in trying to go on a diet until the sleep's in place. So for a team that's, on empty, we need to replenish as quickly as possible. And the first place to start is sleep. So that would be my question. And I'll often I'll get people to do a survey. There's a great, it's actually an American Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, PSQI. And that's what they use in sleep studies before and after to compare whether the study had an effect. And so that's where I'll start with organizations and people and get their score. What's your score? Because it just gives you a digit. And you can go, right, well, I got a 5 and I got a 10. Well, the 10's not as good as a 5. The lower, the better, right? So where's everybody's number? Break down the components that got you that number and find the bits in there that need some help. Is it, eating too close to bedtime? Is it staying up late? Is it disrupted sleep because you haven't blacked out your blinds, whatever it might be? So that would be my starting point is sleep, because from there, everything else can then be built upon.
Mm-hmm. And actually piggybacking a little bit off of our consistency conversation, I think, you brought up the point that those days when you really don't want to do something and then do it is the most rewarding. And I agree. But, a lot of people heavily rely on feelings of motivation and passion, if you will. So how do you help people, like in your coaching, sustain positive changes when the initial motivation wears off?
Yeah, it's inevitable, isn't it? It's absolutely inevitable. So you've got intrinsic motivation, you've got extrinsic motivation, right? And it's the extrinsic motivation that wears off after about 3 months. We know this, right? Gym memberships, they go up in January and then they drop off by about March. And it's the same with anything new. The novelty of the new thing and the momentum of starting just doesn't last. And that's extrinsic motivation. So the key is to find your intrinsic motivation. So the motivation that comes from within, because that's the thing that will keep you going when the difficult, when the days you don't want to turn up, which, as you said, are the rewarding ones. So how do you find your intrinsic motivation? Well, it's about part of it is values, going back to what matters to you. What are your values? and linking that to your purpose. So what's your why is one way of asking it, as Simon Sinek so brilliantly put. Finding your why and then using that as your lever for motivation. So it could be a family thing. That's a common one. I do this for my kids, or I do this for my family, or whatever it may be. Finding your why, which is linked to your values, because that's the bit that will keep you getting out of bed in the morning. And that's part of that purpose, right? If we don't have purpose in life, why would we get out of bed in the morning? So it's a combination of values, why, and purpose. And I think when that's really strong in people's minds, some people don't know. It's really interesting talking to clients when they lose the interest or they get demotivated and you ask them what their why is, they've never thought about it. Or not always. They haven't always thought about it. Mm. And you've kind of almost got to sow that seed with them and say, well, what matters to you? Why did you come in the first place? Why did you turn up that first time? Why did we have that original conversation? And it makes people ponder. It makes them think a little bit. And I think once they've had that time to think, because life's so busy, when do we have time to actually stop and think about our why? Unless the company actually takes us to an offsite and you do all of that great in-depth work, it can be difficult for people. So sometimes they need help finding that. But I think when they've found it, then the consistency will come because the reason for doing it is so embedded.
One thing I think as leaders too that's helpful is over time helping people realign with that why, because some people do actually know their why or they knew what it once was, but things change as you evolve as well or your position changes. And so I think people forget to do that sort of internal tune-up of your why.
You're absolutely right. And I watched or listened to a podcast with Jay Shetty. He's the guy who used to be a monk. And I remember him saying that he used to redo his values every 3 or 4 times a year. And I think the busier you are, the more justification you've got for revisiting them often. Like you say, roles change, life changes. When that happens, that's a good opportunity. It's like your insurance broker who suggests you should renew your insurance or update your insurance because life changes, right? It's not necessarily the right insurance for this stage of life. So yeah, I'm not shere whether I do it that frequently, but it's a really great way of pausing and sort of thinking about, well, where am I at? What's driving me? Where do I want to be? All of those sorts of things. So you're right, it is. And I think people who journal have an insight into that, a better insight into that. They take the time to put their thoughts down on paper. And I suppose by doing that, they're more tuned into those things and it gives them, it may be part of that process or it may just be a way of dumping what's in their head. It depends how they use it. But I think if you do journal and you do review what you've written, it's a great way of being able to see where you're at and potentially fine tune a few things.
Mm-hmm. So a while back, I had someone on the show, Jeremy Aiken, and he's a jiu-jitsu instructor, amazing, decorated, et cetera, et cetera. I'll toot his horn for him. But one really cool thing he did was explain some sort of direct lessons from being on the mat in jiu-jitsu and how that translates to addressing personal conflicts in your life. And one of the biggest things he said that stood out to him in that world is humility. So I want to ask you, what lessons from the gym floor apply directly to managing workplace conflict?
Yeah, I like the metaphor of the mat. I think it's good. It is good. And I think it does work as well. And I think it's funny, isn't it? I've actually just come back off holiday and I was at a hotel and it had an amazing gym, like one of the best. Usually hotel gyms are pretty average.
Yeah.
And I was in Australia and there were these 3 or 4 guys who came in and they were doing a workout together and they kind of monopolized the equipment. And and I was just in the corner doing my thing, I'm on holiday. I'm not going to break anything. I'm just going to make sure I, don't lose too much of the momentum that I've built. And it's funny because they were just making sure, I think, because they were in a group, there's a little bit of that sort of showing off to each other. And they were lifting very heavy weights and their technique was fairly ordinary. And, I was sort of looking in the mirror going, that's going to hurt you. They're younger than me, so potentially it may not. I wouldn't do it like that, but I wouldn't prescribe that for somebody, I'd make sure it was done slightly differently. And I'm thinking, I could easily go and make some suggestions, but I'm sure it probably wouldn't be very welcome because they've got it sussed. There were bros who were showing off. And I think it isn't about the weight. It isn't about how long you're in the gym. It isn't about the amount of work that you get through. It's about where you were last time and where you are today. You're only comparing yourself with yourself, or you're only competing with yourself. You're not competing with other people in that, unless you're an athlete. And so I think that's where that humility piece is. When you get under the bar and you're doing whatever your thing is, it doesn't matter how big or how strong you look in relation to what you should have on that bar. It's more about what are your goals, and everybody's goals are different, right? And so you can't come in and judge anybody for what they're doing in the way that they're doing it because you don't know enough about them. The same happens out running, right? You go for a run and somebody's technique's really ordinary and they're sort of slowly hunched over and you're sort of freshly bouncing past them and going, oh, that looks terrible. But they might be on their 50th kilometer. You don't know how long they've been out, what they've been through, what their morning was like, what their day was like yesterday. And so it's very easy to judge. But the most important thing is to think, well, there's no benefit to doing that. And you don't know where somebody's at. So, yeah, I think it worked in all of those environments, right? You're not in a position to judge. And so being humble and kind is the right thing to do in all of those situations because that's the way in which you'll open up a conversation. That's the way in which you'll learn more. So it's about being curious rather than judgmental.
Absolutely. So what do you find to be the connection between emotional intelligence and physical health?
I think, from my perspective, I think it's that self-awareness. So when you understand what's going on in your body, if you're in tune with what's going on in your body, you have that ability to introspect. So that introspection is, that feels a bit tight. That feels a bit sore. That ankle's not moving as well as the other ankle. I'm aware of it, so I will modify accordingly. And I think from a workplace point of view, I think that emotional intelligence is obviously something you can learn, and we know that it's a skill. But I think it starts with that self-awareness. Where am I at? And what can I do to improve that emotional intelligence? And again, I think that's that part of that introspection. So where am I at? What don't I know? We don't know what we don't know, but at least I'm aware that I don't know something. Therefore, I know I need to learn something or improve something. So I think having that body awareness is a skill that's learned with people who use their bodies daily. And I think when I work with clients in a physical sense, they're often detached from their body. If I say, oh, can you feel that? Are you aware of this? No. What do you mean? Oh, okay. And so you have to start back at the beginning. But I think those people who you say, can you feel that? Are you aware of that? Yeah, I can. That's working. I can feel that. That's absolutely, yes, fantastic. Then those people are much further down the journey. They've understood what it means to feel something of a particular nature. And it's the same with emotional intelligence, I think. The more you learn about emotional intelligence and understand the different components of it, the better you are at deploying it, but also the better you are at seeing your gaps and your weaknesses and realizing that there's some opportunities to learn. So I think it works both ways.
Yeah, I like that. And how do you think leaders can use that self-awareness like as a first line of defense against toxic work cultures?
I think it's calling people out. It really is. That's not tolerating certain behaviors, right? So that it doesn't continue to spread that toxin around the organization. So it's having the brave conversations, the courageous conversations with people to say, look, that's not how we do things around here. And obviously not in public. This is a private conversation, but making sure that everybody's on the same page. So if a leader notices it, they're noticing it because they're high in that particular emotional intelligence. They're seeing a particular behavior that they're not liking. And they realize that by not nipping it in the bud, then they're missing a trick as a leader. So again, it comes back to that self-awareness. And I think often the person that may be carrying out that bad behavior or whatever it may be, again, that's their lack of self-awareness. So it's an opportunity, it's a learning opportunity for that leader to say, look, are you aware that X, Y, Z is going to have this impact across the people that heard what you said, or the organization, or whatever it may be, how many of these conversations are you having that I'm not hearing? And therefore, is there an opportunity here to spend some time working on that emotional intelligence piece, whether that be individually or as a group? I suppose a good leader will know whether there could be one particular department, or it could be the entire organization. So yeah, it's a useful line of defense because they're equipped, right? And then I suppose if they're equipped, then they're able to then pick out the behaviors that need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking about that in the moment feeling of being in a tense conversation or knowing what's happening. And I feel like I know that I have to do some physical cues, like my jaw kind of clenches and I have to relax it, or like my shoulders get like a little hunch and I have to like put my posture back upright, and
Yeah.
just those little things. So when you're in the middle of a high stress situation, what's one or two physical techniques that people can use to stay grounded?
I think the important thing is the awareness of the state that they're in. So if they're aware of, the distance between their ears and their shoulders getting smaller, then that's something that they can reverse. Feeling the inside of their shoes with their toes is another one. So that's a technique. One of the All Blacks, one of our famous rugby players, before he was going to kick a ball between the posts, he would feel his toes in his boots before taking the kick. So it would ground him. So all he had to focus on was connecting with that ball, and not the 80,000 people screaming and shouting and the opposition booing or whatever may be going on, so that he can focus on the job at hand. So little techniques like that. And of course, the most powerful one is breath, right? We know that, we've got the sympathetic side of the nervous system, which is us in that revved up state. And to push us into a parasympathetic state, our breath is the quickest and probably most invisible way of being able to shift that state without everyone around us knowing what's going on. And that's the skill, right? To be able to just level out that breathing, keep those belly breaths going on. So it's pushing that diaphragm and taking a moment to think. And I suppose using the breath as the pause, right? So before responding, before coming back with the wrong way of dealing with something, just taking those breaths to ground yourself. So then the interaction that does occur is so much better quality.
Mm-hmm. And shout out to the New Zealand rugby team. The first time I've ever seen that sport was in South Africa. And I was like, who's this team in all black? And got me really into it while I was out there.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I was actually on the flight home yesterday. I was watching a documentary about the All Blacks when they played in the US. They played against Fiji. I think this was last year
Wow.
at Snapdragon Stadium.
Okay. No idea. No idea.
I know it's a big place, America. But yeah, it's interesting documentary, and how bringing a sport that's not an American, typically an American sport, to America, and the audience was enormous. Obviously, a few fans followed, but a lot of Americans. So it's good to see.
No, that's awesome. So I always like to conclude with a signature resolution question, because this is the resolution room. So in your own life and work, what does it mean to be truly resolved? Not just in conflict, but in how you care for yourself and others.
I think truly resolved is almost like the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like self-actualization. It's like, I'm not sure whether
Can anyone get there?
I was going to say he set a high bar to get to, but I think my interpretation of that, or my response, would be just being a good human being. So being kind, being thoughtful, being humble, putting the ego to one side, and really treating every person that you come into contact with as an opportunity. And so, even at the checkouts at the supermarkets, right? There's a person there that's doing a job. They've got to get that job done. Why not make that a really good interaction? Why not see how their day is rather than them seeing how your day is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you take that same approach, regardless of who's in front of you, whether it's a CEO or, even the trolley boy at the supermarket, and you're non-judgmental. There's no hierarchy in your mind in the way that you approach people. Every human being is a person that there is something to be learned from. And I think that's a really great, and I think there's sort of an element of Buddhism and Eastern philosophy in some of that thinking. And I do align with that sort of line of thinking. And I think that's not a bad way to live your life.
I love that. Well, before I let you go, can you please let everyone know where to follow you and your work?
Yeah, sure. So probably LinkedIn is the best spot. Richard Ellis. I think I'm Rich Ellis here, but everybody calls me Rich. But, Richard is the official title on my birth certificate. So we'll go with Richard Ellis on LinkedIn, and people can, I'd be happy to have conversations with people on there and see if I can help.
Amazing. And your website?
richellis.nz.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
Rich reminds us that balance isn't found, it's built. One consistent choice at a time. The way we treat our bodies mirrors the way we treat our work, our teams, and ourselves. When we ignore rest, resist reflection, or push past pain, we don't just lose energy, we lose clarity. But when we start to see wellness as leadership and health as harmony, everything shifts. Because real resolution isn't only about repairing relationships, it's about restoring rhythm between body and mind, effort and recovery, doing and being. That's how we move from burnout to balance and from reaction to renewal. Thank you for joining me in the Resolution Room. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, please consider sharing it with someone else who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. It really helps more people find these conversations. You can explore our wearable wisdom collection at the Mind Shop or visit lowinsights.com to learn more about our work and upcoming projects. All of the details are in the show notes below. And until next time, keep building in the quiet because that's what will carry you forward.